Joe. Good morning. Thank you for being with us.
Maybe that wasn't that good.
Do you clip hair?
He doesn't need to.
He doesn't. He's got
the
your
heart of my
cut.
district. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Happy birthday, Rob, and congratulations on your Social Security status. And Matt and John, good to be with you this morning.
Thank you, Delegate Joe. How are you, in general, adapting to your role as a delegate now?
Well, I'm gearing up for the session. I unfortunately, due to some back issues, I was not able to make it down to the governor's inauguration. I fully intended to, but under doctor's order, I was told to recover and rest. And thankfully, the last 10 days, I've improved tremendously. So hopefully, I'll be at full health come a week from Sunday when we go in for the interims. We're actually in regular session, although adjourned under the Constitution. The second Wednesday of January is when the legislative session commences, and then every 4 years after a gubernatorial election year, we adjourn until the second Wednesday of February.
Joe, you were appointed to finish out the term of Paul Espinosa, and now, of course, then you won your election bid as well. Do you feel like you have an advantage over the typical rookie delegate headed down to Charleston at this point for the first time as a delegate because of that early appointment?
I would say maybe a little bit. I was able to go down for the interims in November and December and have hit the ground running in terms of gearing up for the logistical things. I did talk to the previous clerk who just retired, Steve Harrison, and he said the only seniority that does give me is if I were to become the longest serving delegate in the House, then I would chair the commencement session if that were to be the case at some point in the future. The longest serving House delegate chairs the new House commencement session.
In the words of Bill Murray,
until the Speaker's elected.
You got that going for you, which is nice.
Well, Delegate Funkhouser, or Mr. Wizard, whatever you like to be called, but your previous employment, you're not unfamiliar in the halls of the Capitol in Charleston.
I do have that as well. I did lobby on behalf of the trade association for the West Virginia's thoroughbred industry called West Virginia Racing United. So I do have some experience in the legislative and rulemaking process. So I think that is certainly helpful in my new role here serving the 98th District.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment, too, because I remember the haircut bill, which one would think had to do with cutting hair, and it didn't. It had to do with share of money and how it was being distributed from horse races, casinos, and such. Joe, could you explain that bill, what it did, and I know you have interest in trying to adjust that.
Sure. So essentially that was in 2014. It was actually stopped during the regular session, and Governor Conlon called a special session, and they passed it, and essentially took 10% of the funds allocated from to the thoroughbred purses and development funds from the racetrack casinos and put it into a special fund directed away from those interests. And so that's been going on since 2014. That was the last time the Democrats controlled the House. And that actually, the bill to repeal that and restore those funds passed the House the last 2 years with Delegate Espinosa as the lead sponsor, and Delegate Wayne Clark would be the lead sponsor, and I'll be co-sponsoring it and hope to get that to the finish line. I think we had some issues with the Senate last year. They didn't take it up, and with the new Senate Finance Chairman, Jason Barrett, I'm optimistic that it will get its due consideration and hope to get it to the finish line.
How much money are we talking about here, Joe?
I think it had a fiscal note of $3.1 or $3.2 million last year. But it's really the principle and the premise is, the basis for the referendum for these expanded gaming at the casinos was, a percentage was dedicated to these industries. And, it really feels like kind of a bait and switch what they did there in 2014 with the haircut bill, because it goes against the premise of the referendum.
Was other programs that were cut 10%, were those restored?
Not exactly. So what happened was there was a number of things that were dedicated to different state agencies, and they all went below the line to satisfy the bond leverage ratio, and then they were then subject to appropriation.
You got that, Matt?
Yes.
You cool with that explanation? You made a face.
No, I didn't mean to make a face. I'm sorry.
I didn't know if that meant you didn't understand exactly or you needed further explanation.
Yeah, so there was a number of programs that were automatically had percentages going to them based off of the initial legislation, from senior services to tourism, so on and so forth, and they all went below the line because there was, when the those in 2014, I don't know if you recall, there was about a $500 million budget deficit. Mm-hmm. So they were scrambling to balance the budget, which is their constitutional duty. And so that's in part of how they chose to do that in 2014.
So essentially, if they went back to, they were cut, but now they've been made. It's not necessarily been made whole, but they've received more money since 2014.
They've been appropriated whatever the legislature determines to appropriate. Instead of a statutory transfer, it is subject to appropriations.
Mr. Gilstrap.
Good morning, Joe. We had folks in earlier this morning from Project Middle Way and the Preservation
Protect
Alliance.
Middle Way.
Protect Middle Way.
Yeah.
Excellent. And that's in your district. So let me ask you, do you have a role or influence in what happens to that old 3M site? Is that on your in your target?
I was not really on my target when I was campaigning, but this all kind of hit the bandwidth in right before the election, and something I've been paying very much attention to because it does affect my district. I'm happy that the somewhat abandoned 3M plant there may be a new use for it, but I think there are certainly legitimate concerns by the residents of both water quantity issues as well as what's percolating before the planning and the zoning commission based off of what they're seeking to do. And I'm not an expert in our county zoning and planning process, but I am. I've met with some of the investors, and they seem like very friendly people. I've met with. I went to the Middle Way Conservancy meeting at the beginning of this month to get an update on how they view things and talking about CTUB's role potentially. So I think I've spoke with some of my colleagues, and I think there may be a role for the state to play in terms of addressing, some of the water quantity issues and the concerns about draining the aquifer, because that's a legitimate concern, especially coming in after a drought year, and you're talking about water extraction, and we do have some provisions of the code. Article 22, Section 26, the Water Resource Management Protection Act, which I think there's some very valid legislative intent there about the water being very important to our economy and to the lives of citizens. And so, I'm trying to strike the right balance here to address these legitimate concerns.
So do you see the legislative role as statewide that will then also affect Middle Way, or is it Middle Way specific?
Well, I'm not. No, I think it's in general. No, and that was certainly part of the campaign. Is that these water issues, even before this was even, I was even aware that this was happening with this particular project. There's a concern with our water studies in Jefferson County has not been updated in terms of a comprehensive study since 1988, and we've certainly grown at least double since 1988 in terms of population, and so that was somewhat updated on a sort of a skinnier model on in 2012, but certainly in campaigning and discussing things with the county commission, everyone was seemed to be there was a consensus there to update that study so we can be informed and make informed decisions no matter what the future trajectory may be in terms of residential, commercial, industrial growth, so we can make wise decisions for the future of our county.
But at the end,
for that matter.
At the end of the day, does this really lie at the feet of either the planning commission or zoning?
Well, in this particular instance, I think they have adequate tools to address it, and we'll see what happens. But I'm certainly looking at 2226. There's also the Groundwater Protection Act, which is another part of Chapter 22, but that's more about quality than quantity. And definitely meeting and discussing with my constituents who will be affected. To make sure that we have, an essential element of life of water, and that's protected, and so that's what I'm looking at. I'll certainly have more details to share as I just got my first batch of bills back from the bill drafting office, and I've got a number of edits to make in that regard.
Delegate Joe Funkhouser, our guest here from the 98th. We talk about this toxic plume from the old 3M plant that was there, and it disturbs me that we've never discussed actually finding a way to clean that up, clean it out, and get rid of it. Is that possible, Joe? And is there funding for something like that?
There was a super fund at one point. Again, I'm not an expert in that manner. I would hope to see it. It may be. I have reached out to some of the folks at the DEP, and there's a deed restriction on that particular property where that is. So, and unless and until that gets cleaned out, there's restrictions on what can be built there. 3M
was the owner of the plant, and last I checked, they were still in business and doing pretty well. They have no obligations to clean up the mess they left behind?
I don't know. That certainly seems like a very valid point that they should be.
Right.
But I'd have to research that to fully answer you. Maybe that's something that our county or attorney general could look into.
Matt, do you know anything about that?
No, I was thinking about what John said earlier, where these companies were all complying with the law at the time that they were discharging these chemicals into the ground, and then like 40 years later
but you still did damage.
I understand, but there'd have to be some sort of knowing aspect of it, I would think, or intention. I don't know. I mean, that would probably be a better question for Joe Freddy. I don't do that type of work, but I did have some questions for Delegate Funkhouser. What committees did you get assigned to?
The Speaker Hanshaw appointed me to the Standing Committee on Judiciary, and we're having a new rules package that is being deliberated on, and we expect to take that up on the first day of the session from adjournment. And the rules have not been changed in 80 years. And actually, Hoppy had a commentary on it today, and there was a lot of narrative out there that it would restrict public debate because it eliminates sort of the theatrical public hearings under the old rules. But this actually, Hoppy makes a very strong case, which is actually supported under the new rules, that it provides for more public input. And I'm also under each standing committees. There's 6 majors: Judiciary, Finance, Gov, Org, Education, Energy and Health, I believe. And they're going to have subcommittees. And the purpose, I think, as Speaker Hanshaw addressed it yesterday, is to make our executive agencies more accountable to certain committees. So we're going to have a much more rigorous oversight role of particular agencies within the executive branch. And I've been also assigned to the subcommittee on courts and corrections, as well as a subcommittee on homeland security under Speaker Hanshaw's appointment there. And I think it's actually going to make there's under the rules under each chair you're going to have the ability to not only accept public comment and testimony but written comment from anyone via email. You don't have to be there, so it's actually going to make the process much more transparent. You're going to have much more public input into the process rather than sort of the theatrics of one public hearing whenever those rules were invoked under prior rules.
Is Judiciary and Courts, Corrections, Homeland, is that your total assignments?
That is. Most freshmen have one major and two subs, and most of the folks that have been there for more than one term have two majors and one sub under each of the major. Mm-hmm. And so the purpose of kind of the rules is this: you might take something under the Judiciary might not delegate it down to the subcommittee. They might take it up. And so each member of the sub will be the member of the standing committee. So they'll have, that's just kind of how it's played out from what I gather is instead of having two majors, or there used to be actually, I think, much more than six majors under the old rules. So that's plenty of work. Judiciary is very busy. They've been known to go past midnight on a regular basis in the last 30 days of the session. So I expect that will continue.
I understand as a freshman delegate, it's tough to get Judiciary there, Joe.
Indeed, I'm very happy, and the Speaker Hanshaw, that was my number one request, and me being an attorney and us not having that many attorneys in our Republican House caucus, I'm very pleased with being on Judiciary.
Who is the Judiciary chair?
J.B. Akers from Charleston. He actually used to be a racing commissioner prior to his appointment to replace Delegate Moore Capito.
Yeah, we had JB on the program a couple of weeks ago, in fact.
Talking about nuclear.
Yeah, he's on to some good stuff there. Joe, in regards to any other priorities you have we haven't discussed, is there anything we failed to bring up?
No. I've got a few other bills percolating, increasing the homestead exemption, doubling that. That was my campaign pledge. That would be my first bill I'd introduce. That does have a $42 million fiscal note from last year, but I think it's, the state cannot do everything to address inflation. We don't cause the inflation in many respects, but that's one way we can address it, particularly for our seniors, to lessen their tax burden.
Can I ask a question about that? Does the $42 million, does that come from the state coffers or the county coffers?
It would, the way I understand it, it's the state reimburses the county for that, similar to the personal property tax.
I think especially in an area like the Eastern Panhandle where property values have risen so swiftly, increasing that homestead exemption is key legislation for seniors in this area.
Yeah, that's one thing I'd like to try and make sure we have a fair assessment as well. A lot of folks have been complaining about their assessment rate. There is a process to do that, but I'd like to try and work with everybody to try and make sure that there's credibility there with the assessments. One other thing, Matt, I wanted to mention is I've got a bill. I've just sent it to Delegate Height because he's Vice Chair of Health, but trying to address the concerns of the involuntary commitment logistics.
Okay, great.
From what I gather, the hearings can occur locally via teleconference or otherwise, but the actual when they're decided they must be committed, there's only two places in the state they can do that, and it's very cumbersome drive, and they have to take two deputies off of duty to do that down to Grafton or Huntington. And I've got a bill to potentially give counties more flexibility in that regard. But I'm working with our Delegate Height and some of our Senate colleagues to try and lessen the burden on our counties, because it happens more often than I thought when I was discussing this with our sheriff. And at the Joint Commission meeting in December.
We've got 30 seconds left. Matt, you had a quick?
You have you and some others have a town hall coming up?
We do, yes. Monday, February 3rd, Senator Barrett, Delegate Clark, and Delegate Ridenour and I will be hosting a town hall at the Corner Connection at 6 p.m.
Very good. We will have Senator Barrett on the program Monday morning at 9, more on the town hall at that time as well. Joe, thank you kindly. I very much appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you, gentlemen, so much. And if anyone needs me, please don't hesitate to reach out. Via email is probably the best way, joe.funkhouser@wvhouse.com.
Asha Hornby here. Larry DeMarco, broker of Modern Realty Results, believes he has some of the best